It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our shows, be sure and check out Patreon. Go to Opperman Report Patreon. Great new content up there. We have the last show coming up with William Hamilton, hour number 3, who is the man at the center of the Promise software, the Danny Casolaro story, the octopus. Several deaths around that story, including Danny Casolaro, and a national security agent who was found beaten to death in his car at the airport. There was an unsolved mystery of how this man was killed. So both me and William are kind of nervous about the content going out there. So we would appreciate your support. Also, too, I'm putting up there the D.C. Madam's phone records. I'm going to be putting that up there shortly. That'll be up there for free at Opperman Report Patreon. You can find our shows Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do a live show every Friday night on Spreaker.com. You go there. There's a chat room. You get an email notification when we put up new content. And you can 4,000 hours worth of shows on there, 10 years worth of shows and content in our archives. And if you go there and look up Alan Graham, Captain Pink, you'll find the first show we did with our guest today, Alan Graham, who's also known as Captain Pink. You can find him at his website, which is called coronado-clarion.com/silo. Coronado-clarion, CLARION.com/silo. And that's where all his books are. You can find all 3 of his books. One is called I Remember Jim Morrison 2, Before the Beatles Were Famous, and Poet Rain by Alan Graham. Mr. Graham, are you there?
Hi, I'm Mr. Talk. Thank you for having me on again.
No, thank you, man. I tell you, I was talking yesterday. This is after that show, man. I was just like on cloud 9. I enjoyed it so much. So thank you. We were talking about Jim Morrison because you're Jim Morrison's brother-in-law.
Well, you're a bloody good interviewer, and you brought the best out in me.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, my friend. Now, a real question I had after we got off the phone yesterday when we were talking is, can you clarify for me the relationship between Jim and his father, the Admiral? You said that the Admiral stepped in and helped him out when he had that arrest in Florida. And what about into the investigation of the death?
First of all, the Admiral reluctantly stepped in at the urging of Jim's lawyers to at least write him a decent letter. He said, my son is a good man. I think this was all just a mistake. He wrote it in, but he wrote it reluctantly. That helped, but it didn't help. It wasn't sincere enough. But before that, Jim had vowed, because the FBI came to Admiral's house when Jim did not show up for the draft, and he was livid. And he said, go after him, put him in jail, just like that. So Jim heard it. He went undercover. He went underground. He lived under a tarp on a rooftop in Venice, ate out of food dumpsters, and was a year, maybe more, just languishing on the beach. Ray Manzarek met him after a year and said, hey, Jim, what are you doing? He said, I'm drinking this Jack Daniels. I said, what else are you doing? He said, I'm writing this poetry. The rest is history. But the Admiral never, ever, ever got over it, because very soon the draft would become the lottery. And the lottery was so all those who had evaded it, they're not going to go catch them all. They went to Canada. They went everywhere. And so Jim's now famous, which meant he was contributing to the tax base, which means he was a regular citizen, which means if they put him in jail, they would destroy all that. And the government is wise in their way. They said, okay, let him make some money in repentance. But the Admiral never forgot it. 10 years after Jim died, we were all sitting in the living room, and the news came on. 10 years ago, Jim Morrison died, and at his height, he was selling $10,000 a night tickets. Well, $10,000, that's $110,000 in this day.
Sure.
The Admiral was making $35,000 a year. he had benefits with the Navy for dental and food, and a whole bunch of other little things that you get benefits in the Navy. But he looked at me and he said, yeah, but that's not real money. That's Hollywood money. I said, that's real money, not him. He thought ill-gotten gains or money gotten the wrong way was not regular. So that's how impractical he was. At the same time, the most practical of men. But that was denial, and that was rage, and that was anger, because he almost brought that to an end with his reckless behavior of sending the FBI after Jim. Jim never forgot that. He also never forgot that his mother ignored the fact when he was 9 years old, he went to her and said one of the relatives molested him. She said to him, you dream that, and if you ever say it again, you'll be in real trouble. He threatened him, and he shut up. But that's when it began to end with his mother.
Fascinating. I never heard that before. Now, let me ask you a question. What about any other Morrison brothers or sisters? Were they artists and creative types too as well, like Jim?
No, Andy was what they call a second man, which means everybody said, you know Jim's brother? And they'd all be talking about his
right.
Name. And then somebody inevitably would say, oh, this is Andy's brother. I met him, but you should have seen his brother. So Morrison adopted that mantle of second guy. And he was bright. Believe me, Morrison was bright. He knew about everything. He studied in school, and he knew about literature. He even knew how to make a bomb in his chemistry class. He was an educated guy, but we always played it down by saying, yo, bro, let's do this, pretending he was a middle class. No, pretending he was a working class guy. He got a job as a welder and a carpenter. He wasn't very good at them, but he stuck with them, intermittently. So he dressed down, what we call dressing down in Hollywood. If you've got a lot of money, a lot of status, you pretend you're ordinary so people don't come up and hit you up.
Now, Alan Graham, what were you doing for a living this period of time? I know you have a background in security, investigations, and even intelligence, it appears, you alluded to. What were you doing for a living during this period of time?
I was always the entrepreneur, but I was also had a secret life of espionage, or let's say just going on missions to set things to right, mostly.
And that would be the type of mission where you go out on the mission and you come back alone. It's two guys and one guy comes back.
No. Mostly I went alone.
Okay.
And what I did, I hired cutouts in the field. They never knew my name. I knew all about them, but they knew nothing about me.
Right.
I was a guy who just simply advertised for someone's labor for the day.
Gotcha.
Some of them were.
Then what was your relationship like with the Admiral? He must have had some kind of affinity and respect for you, being in kind of in similar fields.
Go, Dills, go. He knew that I was on the case. He knew that I was investigating Jim's death. He did not like any of it. He did not want me to see the Jim Morrison movie, and yet he had respect because he knew I came from the streets, and he also knew that I was formidable. He had his own intelligence on me. He was a high-security admiral. It wasn't just an admiral. He was a nuclear admiral, which means around him there's a wall of anyone who comes into it, doesn't care who it is, a brother-in-law right up on the grid. Who is this guy? What does he do? And I would be, scrutinized.
Yeah.
So he knew, because they'd informed him a couple of times subtly, that I was this and I was that. And when I was with Flint, he called me up and saying, what have I done to you? And would you come home? So I came home, and he called me on the phone and said, Alan, welcome home, son. Welcome home. No, all is forgiven. None of that. It was just, let's say, he just acknowledged it without saying it. He said, he started talking about the future instead of the past. Then something terrible happened. Althea Flint's wife died, and the whole thing blew up. And I was still there. And then a bunch of other people like Mitch LaBelle died.
Well, let's back up just a little bit there, because I want to spend a lot of time on this. How did you first meet Flint, and how did you first become involved in the whole Flint private security world, all those characters he had around him?
Well, I was advertising in the Los Angeles Times for a co-producer because the Admiral put the kibosh on my project. Not only did I get Flint, but I got Sylvester Stallone and a bunch of other wannabes. Sylvester Stallone thought he was going to play Jim Morrison. Anyway, Flint called me up one day in my hospital bed in Westlake, California. I was recovering from kidney stones. I was on morphine, Demerol, and Finnegan. And he said to me this, "Is this Alan Graham?" I said, "Yes, it is. I'm Larry Flint. I'm interested in your project. Now, you want to come visit me at my penthouse or at my home?" I said, "Well, I'll take the penthouse. At least you'll be able to find a body there, whatever this was." So, because he's had all sorts of publicity around him about the John DeLorean cocaine case,
right,
the Vicky Morgan sex murder, the a bunch of other prime cases in the media at the time that he simply would lash himself to its moorings and become part of it and jump in, interfere with the DA, interfere with the FBI, interfere with the prosecutor, and just generally gin it all up. So a lot of people were very close to getting acquitted because he tainted it so bad. That was his job. If he thought something was very wrong with the DeLorean case, and it was, the FBI set him up, we went in there full force. Got the name of the agent's office, got the name of the agent, put out some little chitter on the gossip circuit back then, is what it was.
Sure.
And very soon, that would be either his job would be changed to a new prosecutor, but they never let Flint go.
Now, how was Flint accumulating like blackmail material?
Althea Flint was always looking for something on. For example, when I went to Springfield with a cacophony of weird, not a cacophony, a parade of weirdness on a purple jet, I landed in Springfield, Missouri with hookers, pimps, murderers, wannabe murderers, and just people along for the ride. They all had money, or they wanted money, and at the time Larry was offering $1 million to anyone who could bring proof that he was shot by the FBI or somebody else. No one knew at this point, so he had this $1 million check hanging out, and that's what he did as a job, and that's what I did. In the middle of it, I was contacted to say, you're doing Flint. Now you have to do us. And there was no question. I had no way I could not do. So I did. I went undercover. I dismantled the entire security operation by ingratiating myself close to Flint with stories that he wanted to hear. Then I fired everybody. The security guard, his own brother-in-law, had his own team. His wife had his own team, had her own team. They were all murderers, ex-Vietnam, and she called them her pack. So there was Jimmy Flint, his brother, Althea Flint, his wife, Bill Ryder, his brother-in-law, all had a vested interest in seeing me dead, because what he did, he gave me carte blanche, power of attorney. He said, I trust Graham more than any of you. And that's when the war began. Every single one of them came after me. Bill Ryder with his bodyguards, because he had the same team that he had, was on my security detail in Springfield until they were not. I put my own people in, but Bill Ryder and a couple of his bodyguards were still out on the outside trying to blacken me. Bill Mentor, who's now doing life in prison, and Alex Marty, two of his bodyguards, tried to plant C4 on me. They tried to say that I was a bomber of the Capitol building in 1983. I talked to my friend Jeremiah Denton, who was a senator in charge of intelligence, and he said, that's bullshit. We know who did it. It was the AFL-FN, the Puerto Rican group.